Hello, welcome to this edition of IMO Bastani with me, Aaron Bastani, at Aaron Bastani on Twitter. You can follow Novara Media on Twitter, at Novara Media, and you can share, discuss, critique, talk about this content under the hashtag IMO Bastani. Thanks for watching. So this week I want to talk about what else goes on in Greece, the referendum that's coming this Sunday. I'm speaking in London on the Wednesday. Alexis Tsipras, the Greek Prime Minister, announced on the 27th of June, several days ago, that there would be a referendum on the latest deal between Greece and the Troika. The Troika is the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Tsipras, of course, heads up the largest party in the Greek government at the moment. It's a coalition government between Syriza, the radical left party, and a smaller right party called ANEL. Tsipras and his colleagues in Syriza, for the most part, are advocating a no vote, a no to this deal with the Troika. What's at stake if the Greek people choose to vote oxy, no, on Sunday, really can't be understated. It's not just bringing into question the credibility of the European Union and the European Central Bank. This would be potentially the biggest amount of money the IMF has ever lost, and Northern European taxpayers would be looking at a loss of around 320 billion euros. That's a huge amount of money. The situation is so bad in Greece that you can't even withdraw more than 60 euro a day from an ATM. For those of us in the UK, the US, Germany, that's an amazing thing to contemplate, especially for a country which is in the European Union. More than that, a founding member of the Euro. That belies a terrifying reality for Greece and austerity. The numbers here speak for themselves. The economy has contracted by around a third since 2009. Unemployment currently stands at 27.5%, and wages, on average, are down by a quarter. But the most terrifying number of all for investors in Greece, those who currently hold Greek sovereign debt, is this one. Greek public debt currently stands at 175% of GDP. That means it's 175% of the total annual economic output of the country. Well, what's more, it's going up year on year and doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. The IMF is speculating that Greece could run 15 years of budget surpluses between now and 2030. Bear in mind that Greece hasn't run a budget surplus since before 1990. Even if they did that, however, even if they did the impossible, debt to GDP would be 118%, well above what's commonly understood as the danger zone for investors in sovereign debt. For many, the most conventional explanation, in my opinion also most ignorant, is that Greece is in the economic predicament that it is because of the people, because it's a lazy country, and that, like most Southern Europeans, it's a corrupt country. Those kinds of people offer arguments I find all too predictable and lazy. The Greeks would rather be at the beach than at work, that they would rather eat souvlaki than study, that they would rather drink raki than invest in their futures. Well, that might sound quite good to some of us. That account of Greece's economic problems being an outgrowth of the laziness of its people is absolutely at odds with reality. Greeks are among the hardest working people in the world, and data from the OECD in 2012 shows that they work, on average, 2,000 hours a year. By comparison, the average Brit works about 1,650 hours, while the average German works less than 1,400 hours a year. In fact, those who work the least in Europe also enjoy the highest standard of living, including the Netherlands, Denmark, and France. And guess what? They're all in Northern Europe. Another really important fact, all too frequently missed by the mainstream media, is that 90% of the money that's been poured into Greece by the EU, by the ECB, and by the IMF hasn't gone to the Greek people, it's gone to banks. That money was effectively used to bail out banks that suffered from the 2008 crisis. Only 10% of the money given by the Troika to the Greek government has actually found its way to the Greek people. And yet, all too often, people accept wholesale this idea that money from Northern Europe is bailing out the lifestyles of lazy Southern Europeans. This money has effectively bailed out banks that recklessly lent to Greece, Greek banks, the Greek government, before the crisis of 2008. And when the chickens came home to roost, they didn't want to face that risk. That risk was socialised by the taxpayers of both Southern and Northern Europe. More than the unemployment of 27.5%, more than the astronomical public debt of 175% of GDP, more than the third collapse in total economic output of the country, more than the quarter reduction in average wages. Perhaps the biggest problem that confronts the Greek government and the Troika is that Greece, despite facing the most severe austerity that any advanced capitalist economy has ever undergone, is still not growing. It's still running budget deficits rather than surpluses. It's still spending more than it brings in through general taxation. And until that happens, there's really no light at the end of the tunnel. But in order to run those budget surpluses rather than deficits, the economy has to grow. Like I said, it's already collapsed by around a third, and it's really unprecedented in Europe since the end of the Second World War. It needs to grow, but it can't. Why? Well, because Greece is uncompetitive. You would think the country which has seen a decline in wages, that's faced the problems it has, would begin to come back, that it would attract foreign investment, that labour unit costs would be so low that people would begin to see the Greek labour market as a good investment. The big problem here is that Greece, to grow, needs to be competitive, and to be competitive, it probably needs to leave the Eurozone. I mean, the project was founded in the first place effectively for the interests of the German capitalist class. I spoke at a conference 2 years ago, and there was a former head of the Danish central bank, and he captured it very well when he said that once Germany had entered this economic bloc with the rest of Europe, this was in 2001 when the euro first launched, and it chose to depress domestic workers' wages, it was always going to have a head start. Germany was the largest labour market as well as consumer market in Europe, and by doing what it did, purposefully tried to make its exports more competitive by reducing the costs of its labour, by pressing down domestic wages, the rest of Europe would follow. Austerity in Germany in the early noughties would necessitate, eventually, austerity for the rest of Europe as the economies of the continent became ever more integrated within single monetary union. Germany's competitive economy, and it's one of the biggest exporters in the world, is directly related to the uncompetitiveness of the economies of Greece, Italy, Spain and others also within the Eurozone. Historically, these economies, before being in the Euro, would have just devalued their currencies. They can't do that anymore. That was historically the big trick of Italy after the Second World War, and now that's completely off the table. German unemployment's at a 20-30-year low. German exports are doing fantastically well. It's ultra competitive. It runs trade surpluses and budget surpluses. And why is it doing that? It's directly because of the deficits, both budgetary and trade, that are being run by the peripheral economies of Europe's south. So this is the unspeakable reality of the situation. Greece will run deficits, it will be a low growth or a no growth economy, and it'll be uncompetitive for as long as it remains in the Eurozone. It's simply not possible that Greece can resolve these problems while staying in that bloc. But we've been here before. In 2012, George Papandreou, then Prime Minister and leader of the now almost dead Greek PASOK party, tried to call a referendum around a similar set of issues. Back then, the Troika, much as they're trying now, effectively held a gun to the head of Papandreou, saying that the democratic participation, interests and desires of the Greek people were strictly off the menu. Shortly afterwards, Brussels imposed an undemocratic, centrist, technocratic government headed up by Papademos. In fact, they tried something very similar at the same time and succeeded there too in Italy, getting Mario Monti to form a centrist, technocratic government between 2011 and 2012. Last week they tried to repeat that trick, asking an array of centrists, technocrats, if they could form a government to replace Syriza. They said that simply was not possible. One senses, however, that this time things are really different, and that if the Greek people on Sunday choose to vote no, if they vote oxy, the solution will not be as simple as parachuting in a Papademos or a Mario Monti. My opinion is that the outcome here is going to be decided by that perennial of Greek politics. Who has the most social power on the streets? The left, the KKE, Syriza, the unions, or the right? Golden Dawn, the army, and the police? That's a question that Greek politics has tried to avoid systematically since 1974. If I was Greek, I'd be voting oxy, no, on Sunday. But perhaps more importantly, I'd be under no illusions about there being a solution to the social crisis in Greece within the Euro. For Greece to solve that social crisis, it's going to have to leave the Eurozone. That's the only real way out here, unless we see a complete transformation of the European Union project, which I think is pretty fair to say it's not going to happen. So Greeks, Italians, French, Portuguese, Spanish, my advice would be get out of the Eurozone as quickly as you can. Another Europe is possible, but I don't think it's one with the single currency. For Brits, I think the experience the last several days, watching these European elites behave as they have, this cabal in Brussels, has really undermined my confidence in the ability of us as people in Britain, as the peoples of Europe, to change this project. And I really am reconsidering how I would vote in any potential referendum on British membership of the EU in 2017. Frankly put, these people, and by that I mean the Troika, the ECB, the IMF, the EU, have absolutely no trust, faith or respect for the democratic impulses of the peoples of Europe. So what do you think? You know what I think. And why don't you put those thoughts down on the hashtag IMO Bastani. More than that, why don't you check out the other hashtags relevant to Sunday's referendum? Hashtag Oxy, hashtag Oxy15, and hashtag referendum. The weather really is pretty good. It's 34 degrees today. Thunderstorms tomorrow, but I think next week's going to be very nice as well. So again, we'll have another IMO al fresco. Thanks.